we spoke about how there are three expressions of the soul that are defined by thought, speech, and action. That's how the soul really can channel itself in this world. And then we went even deeper. We said that as we express the soul through those three avenues, the thought, the speech, and the action, we also must ensure that the soul fully expresses itself through the 613 commandments. Now, the 613 mitzvot are also divided into the different limbs and organs of the body. If you recall, right, every mitzvah really pertains to a different limb, to a different organ. And by fulfilling that mitzvah, either through thought, speech, or action, some mitzvahs, as we mentioned, can only be fulfilled through thought and through speech, not through action. Like the mitzvahs that pertain to the temple. We can't fulfill them today, but we can fulfill them with thought and with speech. So when we fulfill all of the 630 mitzvot through thought, speech, and action, then our entire body, so to speak, our entire being, and is expressing, becomes a channel for that soul. And the soul then is completely revealed. And that's really the goal of man, to be able to fulfill all of these mitzvahs, either through thought, speech, and action, if it's possible through action and through action. And if not, then at least through thought and speech, and unleash the soul, so to speak. We also spoke about how everyone has his portion, even though we have to fulfill the 613 commandments, everyone has his mitzvah that he resonates with the most. We said that this might have to do with our previous reincarnation, that there we failed in a particular department, so we're given another chance in this world, in this life, to rectify that. And therefore sometimes we have either a very special attachment with the mitzvah, referring to the root soul, to the root of our soul, or maybe a very particular challenge with the mitzvah that refers to, again, the previous reincarnation. So sometimes we have these special attachments with mitzvahs that we also have to pay to, because it has to do more specifically with the root soul and the mission of our souls in this world. So that's really, to recap very, very briefly, what we spoke about since the beginning of chapter 4. Let's continue here, as mentioned, with now the midot, the emotions, the drive behind the expressions of the soul, as we just mentioned. Who wants to read? 126 at the top, right here, and the midot, namely fear and love. Does anyone want to read?
You always get so many people.
I'll read if anybody else wants to, but I feel badly that I always read.
Please, Margot, go for it. Go.
That's right? Okay, I feel badly, but.
No, not at all.
Okay.
And feel good that you're jumping in the sea.
I do. I really do, my heart. Okay. And the midot, namely fear and love, together with their offshoots and derivatives, are clothed in the fulfillment of the commandments in deed and in speech. That is, the study of Torah, which is the equivalent of all the commandments.
Right.
The author singles out Torah study as an example of the mitzvah fulfilled through the garment of speech, though other examples of such mitzvot exist, such as the recitation of the Shema and grace after meals, because it is the most prestigious of the mitzvot, the equivalent of them all.
Right. So again, he singles out the Torah study, but the point here, if you go back to the bold letters, the midot, which means the love and the fear, the emotions behind each and every mitzvah, are emotions that need to also find some type of expression, need to also be completely attached to our deed or to our thought or to our speech for the mitzvah to be wholesome. You know, there's a great story about the Baal Shem Tov, who once came to a synagogue, founder of the Hasidic movement, and although there weren't too many people there, he said, it's very stuffy in here. It's like, I can't breathe. And I asked him why. There's only just a few people. There's plenty of room. He said, it's still very, very stuffy. And again, I asked him why, and he said, well, that's because every prayer again is also a mitzvah, right? Every prayer has wings. The wings of the prayer are ava and those midot that we're speaking about, love and fear. When you pray, you have to pray with love and you have to pray with fear, recognizing that with awe more than fear, recognizing that you pray in front of God. And he says here in this in the synagogue, apparently they pray without any emotions, without any midot. So the prayers can't really take off with those wings. So they stuck here in the synagogue, and that's why it feels very stuffy. But in a way, it's true not just for prayer, it's true for every mitzvah. If we want a mitzvah really to reverberate in the heavens and to create that light, which it does regardless, but to create a light that shines on and on beyond any natural limitations, then we need to give it wings. How do you give a mitzvah wings? With passion, with love, and with fear. One of the things Rabbi Ravadin, Rabbi Steinsaltz would mention, the author of this commentary, is that there's one thing that you can create almost anything with coldness, with intellect in this world. But there's one thing in this world that you can't create without passion, without warmth, without midot, without love and fear. And what is it? Life. Life you can't create without passion. You can't create a baby without life, without passion. Same here. If you want to give life to your mitzvahs, if you want it to be a continuity to your mitzvahs, then, and this light that again goes on and on and on forever and ever, and needs wings. What are the wings? Love and fear, or that passion. Because without it, really, it becomes, although you may do it, although you may perform it, it becomes very limited, becomes very dry, and in a way, it stays here in this world. Tanya speaks about this much later on in chapter 39 and 40 about how really how they take off, how these mitzvahs, or how prayer or how study of Torah, for example, takes off. And he goes into the details of, the wings also can have their limits. Even though you might give flight to a prayer, as we just spoke about, a mitzvah, it might get stuck in the world of formation. Because remember, there are 4 worlds. This world is a world of action. So some get stuck here. Others get stuck in the world of formation. Others, prayers get stuck in the world of creation. And others get stuck in the world of emanation. And very few prayers really have that ava and ira that are so pure and intact that they go directly to the throne of glory, to God himself. Now, if it gets to the world of creation, we're in a good situation, or the world of emanation too. But again, he speaks about this more in chapter 39, chapter 40. But I'm mentioning this because in a way, we're lucky right now during this month. This is the month of Elul. And the month of Elul is a month not just of preparation for the high holidays, so not just of introspection, of self-reflection, but as the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya himself, teaches in a different book of his, in a book called Likutei Torah, teaches that the king is in the field. So God is the king, and throughout the year, like a king, he might be in his palace, and to speak to him and to have those prayers really take flight directly to him, that needs to go from one angel to another, from one secretary to another. But in this month, God is here, God is present, God is in the field. And we don't have to worry too much about those wings, because if we make that little effort, just like when a king is in the field, if we just go out of our home and he's there, he's not in his palace now, he's there, then we'll meet him. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi also adds that he's there in the field with a big smile and a shining countenance. We mentioned this last week during Rosh Chodesh. So don't worry too much about these wings, especially during this month, because even if you pray with a little bit of intention, with a little bit of love and fear, a little bit of midot, if you do a mitzvah with that little passion, then you'll meet the king because he's in the field during this month. I was just reading a story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe yesterday. As mentioned, there's every week something comes out because he touched so many people. So it's called My Encounter. And this man, his last name is Adams. I forget his first name, but he tells about a few blessings that he received from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And one of the troubles he went through in life was when his wife was very sick. She was pregnant at the time. And he wrote to the Rebbe that the doctors are not too optimistic and so on. And the Rebbe responded, don't you worry, you're in the month of Elul, the king is in the field. So you have God with you. And his wife miraculously came out of that, and Baruch Hashem, she became better. So this is a month Chodesh HaRachamim V'Aslichot, the sages call it also. The month of mercy, of Rachamim, of compassion, where God demonstrates his compassion. So even though we're speaking about this necessity of midot, this need to have full passion, full fear and love, during this month, we're a little bit off the hook, a little bit, because God is in the field and we're much closer to him than we may even think.
I'd just like to make a comment about the word fear. Yireh Shamayim. I remember Rabbi Abrama used to say that fear is not the correct interpretation.
I agree.
The word that should be used is revere, not fear.
Right. Very good. I agree. You're right. I don't know why it's translated so often as fear, maybe because that's the literal translation. But if you go deeper, I want to go deeper into that. Because what's fear? Fear of God. So in the word for fear in Hebrew is yirah. Yirah in Hebrew is the exact same word as the word for seeing. It comes from the root word ra'ah, ro'eh, which means to see. What's the connection between seeing and fear? What's the connection? Connection, I think, is quite simple. And that is, what does it mean to fear God? What it means is that you know that God is watching you. God is seeing you. God is seeing. He's seeing. And because he's watching you, you're accountable. You can't just do whatever you want. The world is not a jungle. God is watching you. That's fear. That's this idea, that's yirah. So again, fear. When God is watching you, you can have multiple reactions. You can have, oh gosh, I'm afraid. But he's not watching you in such a way. He's not watching you to make you afraid. He's watching you to make you accountable. That's all. And he's watching you also as a loving partner, saying, look, I'm here with you. No matter where you are, I'm with you. So really, that's what fear. It's that sense of accountability, because God is watching.
Rabbi, I worked on a sermons yesterday from Jeremiah.
Yeah.
For 2 days now.
Wow.
And I'm left realizing that from what you're talking about as well, that we each have our own actions that we do, and those are the actions that make us what we are.
Right.
And it's like you can't blame this in the world and that in the world. You're in charge of what you put in your heart and what you put in your mind, and obviously you have choices, but it just kind of opened up a whole new world for me by working on that piece. It was
right. No, very good.
What you're saying, I'm now going, yes, that's what I read yesterday.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No,
yeah.
It's very good. I'm happy you're mentioning this, because I personally think also, if we want to develop this, and that is that I think that's what our society is really missing the most. I lament at the fact that we don't have a moment of silence anymore in schools, in public schools at least. When, in the times of Ronald Reagan, this was a big thing where kids would begin the day with a moment of silence. Now, because of the separation of church and state, so they couldn't call it a moment of prayer, or a moment of recognizing that there's a God in the world. But still, that was the idea of this moment of silence. I think when kids are taught that, when we start the day, knowing that there's a God watching, it changes our behaviors completely. Because you recognize that you're accountable. You don't just do anything. There are many studies about this. I think we've mentioned this in the past. Scientifically, there are many studies about this, of how, for example, kids cheat less in a bright room than they cheat in a dark room. Why? Because in a bright room, they know that they've been watched, so they won't cheat. There's many, again, there's a great book all about this, Big Gods, it's called, by some Iranian author, I forget his last name, long Iranian name, but Big Gods. And it proves that societies that have a God are better societies. His line that he repeats in this book time and time again is, watched people are nicer people. Now, why? Because you watched, you know that you're not here alone. There's a God you're accountable to. And unfortunately, we're missing this. We're missing this element in our society. You can't just do whatever you want. It's not just about you. It's about the creator that created you. You're in this together. You're accountable to him. And I think if our kids would know this more, then I think our society would be better. Really do. I think if we would really internalize that, then there really would be no need for policemen. But until we internalize that, there's a deep need for one. But that's what's lacking most. You know, we just read this. It comes from Deuteronomy, that you know, Moses speaks about how the nation of Israel will forget God and so on, and then they'll realize, because all these troubles will fall on them. Now realize, that's what it says in the verse. And we'll realize, it's because God isn't in our midst that all these troubles followed us. Because there is no God, my God, in my midst. That's why all these troubles come along. Implying again what we're speaking about, that if we recognize that there's a God here, then there's no that jungle doesn't come about. Then there's order. Then there's clarity. Then there's peace. Even there's somewhat some harmony in the world. So Moses warned us about this 3,000 years ago, over 3,000 years ago. Okay, all right.
Rabbi,
yes.
if I could just comment about the moment of silence. I think that after the horrific attack in San Diego at the shul,
yeah,
the rabbi, that this was a Chabad initiative to restart a moment of silence. I don't know where it went, but there was some press coverage of it, and there was some discussion about that.
Right. So there was then, and I also recall that even in Israel, after the 3 boys were kidnapped, there were many talks about doing that in Israel too. And each time there's a tragedy, there's a talk about that. But I don't know. You're right. I don't know how much it's taken off. And unfortunately, you know, I mean, I don't know if that's the only solution, right? I think us teaching it to our children and to our neighbors and so on, that also makes a difference. But we're accountable. That's the whole point. You know, Dennis Prager has a great line about that, and says that imagine you're walking in the street and it's dark at night and you're all alone in a narrow alley, and then you see 3 big men, muscular men, maybe even with tattoos, and you know, coming out of some corner that you didn't notice. What's your automatic reaction?
Fear.
Automatic reaction is fear. But then someone comes and whispers in your ears, these 3 men just came out of a 3-hour Bible class. And all of a sudden your fear goes away. Why? Because if they came out of a Bible class, you know they're accountable to God. So not gonna do anything bad, at least at that moment. But still, so that's to prove this point.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
By the way, I think that you know, to analyze this even further, not that we're in a class here of social criticism, but but it's all connected to this love and fear, and to the ability to recognize that there's an eye watching you. But by the way, which is also a Mishnah in the Ethics of Our Fathers, and I'll get to the point, but there's a Mishnah in the Ethics of Our Fathers that says that all a person needs to know in order to live a fulfilled and meaningful life is 3 things. Ein ro'ah, v'ozen shamat, v'chol ma'asecha b'sefer nichtavim. In the words of the Mishnah in Ethics of Our Fathers, which means there's an eye that watches you, and there's an ear that hears you, and all your deeds are written in a book. And that book will be shown to you after 120. So there's an eye that watches, and there's an ear that listens to everything you're saying, and all your deeds are recorded. So be careful. But now I forget what I was going to say about the social criticism, but it doesn't matter.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was going to say this, and I think that in a way, it also is connected to another topic, and that is that there's the moment of silence that is needed. And I think a shift in education that is also needed is that we teach our children, unfortunately, I see this more and more, that they're perfect to the point that even their feelings are justified, no matter what the feeling is. I know kindergarten teachers. I know this. I've seen it firsthand. That they start the day asking the children to tell them what they feel like, and let's take a moment before we begin the class. Tell me what's on your heart. What's your feeling? Oh, you feel that, and justify every feeling. We're here. We're perfect beings. Where is the bad in the world? The bad is on the outside. So automatically what we have to do is to fight the bad there. Bigotry, racism, sexism. The bad is always out there. What about the bad in here? No, we're perfect. Judaism teaches the opposite. The bad starts here. You first have to control your evil inclination. You have a Yetzer Hara. Not every feeling is justified. Some feelings should be nullified, should be completely analyzed and eradicated. Not everything in here is good. We have, again, we're told from the get-go, you have we say it, Rashi says that immediately, the first prayer we teach our children is the Shema that was just mentioned. Rashi points out that when we say in the Shema, Ve'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavecha, that you should love God, your heart, with all your heart, he points out, 1 second, there's an anomaly in the Hebrew language, because it says that you should serve God with all your heart, bechol levavcha. If you really know how to speak Hebrew, you should be saying bechol libcha, right? With one bet. Why are there two bets in the word levavcha, in the word heart? And again, Rashi points out the two bets relate to two different sides of your heart. You have the good side of your heart, the good inclination, and the other bet stands for the bad inclination, the bad side of your heart. So not all your feelings are good. Depends which side of the heart they come from. You have evil. What about the bad in here? That we don't teach our children. If we don't teach our children to control their bad in here, then the bad flourishes in here. And then it creates a lot of problems. And then we realize much later on, because God wasn't in my midst, all these troubles followed me, like Moses says. But if we had to shift one thing in education, it's not just a moment of silence, but more importantly, I think to teach our children that the bad is not just out there, but the bad primarily is in here. If we can control the bad in here, then if everyone can control the bad in here, then maybe there wouldn't be a need to fight the bad out there, because there wouldn't be bad out there. Where does the bad out there come from? People recognizing that there's no bad in here. That's where it comes from. So that's another shift of education. That's exactly what we're speaking about. Yira, that's Yira, recognizing that God watches you. And therefore, if you have bad in here, fight it. Or ignore it at least, completely. But don't justify it. Not every feeling of the heart is good. Maybe it comes from the bad side of the heart, from that other bet, from levavcha, from your evil inclination. I think that's truly missing.
I had a question, Rabbi.
Yes.
Do you know in Israel, have they, in general education, not necessarily at a yeshiva, at just general education, do they have that minute of silence or acknowledge what's been removed here in public education? Do they have it there?
That's a good question. I mean, they have some public schools have prayer. And I think prayer is synonymous to that. But no, otherwise, no, many don't. And it's saddening to say the least.
Yeah, I think there are schools, Rabbi, in Israel. I know where David was teaching his last teaching position. They had religious and secular students there. And the secular students is where he would teach while the religious students were in tefillah. Mm-hmm. And he would teach them about Torah, and he would talk about the history of Israel and things of this nature during that time, even though if they weren't in formal shachri.
Right. That's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, I think Bible classes or Torah classes and things like that have the same effect. Yeah. Especially if David teaches them, then I'm not worried. David is Jordan's son, who just, by the way, let's give him a little plug. but he just authored a book that is a must read. I just got it. I haven't read it yet, but I just got it at
Me
home.
either.
What?
I have it, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah,
But,
neither have I.
it's the next one.
It's called The Lone Soldier, and it's really about,
It's not a lone soldier.
not a lone soldier. Sorry.
Right,
There you go. And that's a picture, by the way, that Jordan took, if I'm not mistaken, right?
right at the hotel 10 plus years ago now.
That's it. Even though he was a lone soldier, he was not a lone soldier. About
He had Hashem with him the whole way.
That's beautiful. Beautiful.
Yes.
There you go. Okay, thank you. All right, let's continue here. Speaking of love and fear and those midot that are the engine behind, that should be the engine behind every mitzvah, prayer, and all other mitzvahs. So now he analyzes love and analyzes fear. Does anyone want to continue to read? Middle of page 126. For love is the root of all the 248 positive commandments. Anyone? Margaret.
I'll continue. Jordan, go ahead.
Okay. For love is the root of all the 248 positive commands, which derive from it and have no true foundation without it, since he who fulfills them in truth is one who truly loves the name of God and desires to cleave to him in truth.
Right.
In the commentary, the 613 mitzvot consists of 248 positive commandments, for example, to give charity, put on tefillin, and 365 prohibitions, for example, murder, adultery, eating leavened bread on Passover. These correspond to the 248 members and 365 blood vessels of the body and their corresponding organs of the soul, as mentioned earlier. The 248 positive commandments are the means by which a person expresses his love for God. Thus, the positive mitzvot derive from the soul's love of God in the sense that love of God is the feeling that motivates and drives their observance. Although a person can observe the mitzvot merely out of habit or because he was trained to do so from childhood, this is not a true observance with a true foundation, but a casual, extrinsic deed with no relation to the person's inner being. He who fulfills them in truth is one who does so out of a genuine inner desire.
Right. Okay. So this is where this is going, right? So you have 248 positive commandments and 365 negative commandments. The engine behind the 248 positive commandments is the engine of love. The engine behind the 365 commandments is the engine of fear, of yirah, of accountability. Maybe that's the better word. Now, love is tricky if we want to go a little bit deeper, because in many instances, and I see this in many relationships, as I'm sure you do, love can be interpreted as love as altruistic, but really it's not. Why so? Because, and Hasidic teachings speak a lot about this, that love can be very selfish. I think I love, but I really don't love. Why? Because it's the same love we sometimes we apply the love towards God or the love towards human beings as the same love that we have towards tomatoes, right? And what am I saying? That many people say I love tomatoes. But if you love tomatoes, you leave them on the plant they came from. You don't cut them off. You don't kill them. You don't eat them. Let them live. People say I love fish. Love fish, leave them in the ocean. Don't eat them. So what do you love? You love the pleasure that the fish bring you. So you love yourself. You don't really love the fish. And that type of love is existent in relationships. I love this person. You really love this person, or do you love what that person brings you? The pleasure that it brings you, the company that brings you, the luxury that it brings you, the entertainment that he brings you. What do you love? Do you really love that person? If that person didn't have all the stuff that he brings you or she brings you, will you still love him? Because if you love him for what he brings you or she brings you, then you're loving yourself. You're not loving the other person. And people relate to God in the same way. I love God because he brings me calmness. He brings me serenity. He brings me blessings. Then you don't love God. Then you love yourself. And again, back in chapter 39, where he speaks of those engines more, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi says that there's some people also are love God in a way that rabbis, and he attacks rabbis in a way, saying, well, you love God because God makes you become a rabbi. So you're loving yourself. You love the title that God gives you. You love the knowledge that God gives you knowledge through his Torah. So you don't love God. It's got nothing to do with God. And the love that we're speaking about here is a love that's completely altruistic. It's not about me. In a way, it's exactly like what Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi himself was caught once saying. He was caught once meditating and in a state of complete ecstasy. This is in the book of Hayom Yom. And I'm happy to pull it out for you. And we'll read it together. But this is the ultimate type of love. Now, to reach that type of love is almost impossible. It takes a Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi to do so. But I'm going to share with you the screen of he's saying here. It's worth reading inside. If I can find it quickly, otherwise I'll just quote it myself. But he was once found in the state of complete ecstasy, and Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi there you go. This is the author of the Tanya. So the same one that wrote this. Okay, I can't find it. So I'll just be brief and say it, quote it myself, but he was once found again in the state of ecstasy, and he was shouting to God, God, I don't want your reward in the Garden of Eden. I don't want your reward in this world. I don't want anything that you may have in store for me. All I want is you alone. That's all I want. Now that's love. I don't love you because you have a reward for me in the Garden of Eden, in the world to come. I don't want that world. I want you alone. That's love. I'm completely dedicated. I don't want you for what you bring me. I want you for you. And that's the ultimate type of love. Now, by the way, that's how those prayers, that's how those mitzvahs really fly all the way to the throne of glory. When there's no personal interest involved, then they fly directly to God himself. But if there is some type of personal interest involved, then again, they could be affected. Their flight can be limited. They could get stuck in one of the worlds, as mentioned before. But that's the type of true love we should have regarding the positive commands. Dare I say that I think that this is exactly who Rabbi Steinsaltz was and continues to be in a way. He was a man who had no beef in it for himself. I wrote about this, but I remember that in 2010, November of 2010, was a big celebration in his honor after his completion of the commentary of the Talmud, something that no one had done before, besides maybe Rashi 1,000 years ago, opening up the world of the Talmud to the world and making it accessible to all, not just with his translation, but with his brilliant commentary, and celebrating this massive magnum opus that took him 45 years. Rabbi Steinsaltz was asked to speak, and this is what he said. I'm quoting almost verbatim. He said, when I die, I really don't care whether I'll go to heaven or to hell. I further don't care what will be written on my tombstone. The only thing I care about is whether I was able to infect people positively so that they can move forward each in their own way in their spiritual journey. I want to infect people. And that's all he cared about. He was that ultimate ambassador of God, pushing people to go forward, pushing the world to become better. He didn't care about heaven and hell. It's not about me. It was never about me. In a way, that's the model really of what the Tanya right here is speaking about through his commentary. That's the type of love that's needed behind every commandment, behind every prayer.